Warning, the following program may contain views and opinions that are entirely uninformed and are not to be taken to heart, so don't start, it's only art. Please apply now a thick layer of sarcasm protection cream to the insides of your ear canals. Deep chats do not intend to offend, merely pretend until the very end.
Ask yourself, are you man enough, hero enough, insane enough to enter the arena with two of the fiercest gladiators in the galaxy? If you answer yes, you're a big, fat liar.
We can choose what we want to take in. We can block out the stuff we don't want to. And even the algorithm plays to that. They want to keep you in your own bubble because that's what will keep you engaged.
Yeah, all lives matter, you're right. But you can't say that as a kind of counter statement to Black Lives Matter. No one's saying that there are some kinds of lives that don't matter.
And it was a dildo.
Boris is this, eccentric, laughable buffoon, so he gets let off the hook. Having my mum in particular sort of slowly and quite loudly saying the word slag room.
I have heard the lie that you cannot pee and poo at the same time. Welcome to the third Deep Chats podcast. And as you can probably tell by the lovely piano in the background, this time we have an intro. On this episode, I spoke with my longtime childhood friend Joel Holmes, and in an attempt to try and give a little bit more context to listeners about future guests, I'm now going to ask my guests to describe themselves in terms of their age, appearance, and their judgment skills. Don't worry, it'll make sense in a second. So, here they are for Joel.
Age.
22.
Appearance.
Blonde, blue-eyed, kind of stick-thin, pale.
Judgment skills.
I think I'd go with a solid 8 on 10. Very rational, very analytic, but prone to sort of anxiety paralysis, if you like, of sort of weighing up too much and not including enough of that gut feeling, I think, and not sort of, I think I can definitely work on getting a bit of anxiety out of the way when it comes to the sort of decision-making process, because it turns even the most rational person irrational very quickly, I think.
Yes, I find that as well. It's a daily struggle with anxiety. It's weird, but I don't know what your thoughts are about it, and I have no scientific backing for what I'm about to say, but do you think everybody gets anxiety? Or I know some people will get it more, but do you think everybody has a little bit in them that fights against things?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, also, I am not proficient enough at this to be able to give a sort of certifiable answer, but I think, I think you can think of it in spectra rather than sort of classifications, if you like. I think, I sort of accept on the one hand that classifying, saying, okay, this person has problems with anxiety, this person doesn't. I can see how it's helpful from the perspective of diagnosis and how to treat people who do suffer from it quite badly, and the different properties of different people's anxiety at different stages in their life. I understand why that human beings think best discreetly. We think in terms of putting things into little boxes, and that isn't always a bad thing. It can be very useful to do that. You're sort of slightly simplifying an otherwise very complicated sort of ocean-like picture. But I think sort of in truth, I think it is more of a spectrum. But it's sort of best represented as a sort of collection of different ways that people struggle with it and deal with it and progress from it, and and obviously there's also that second dimension where it's sort of along one axis it's sort of how anxious do they actually feel, but on the other axis it's sort of, well, okay, how much is this inhibiting the person's life, and that you've got to think, I think, maybe separating it in terms of the sort of practical ramifications of it, as something that is actually affecting someone in their capacity to live versus the sort of experience of it as a feeling. Somebody might be, you know, they might be placing themselves in very anxious circumstances. You know, they might be doing very stressful things, but they have a tolerance to it. It's something that, you know, through an act of will, through a sense of duty, through some other thing, it might be part of their profession, where they're having to engage with very anxious feelings a lot of the time, but it's actually their ability to cope with that is beneficial to them, and they live a good life for it, you know. But yeah.
I think no, that was beautifully put. I think one example that springs to mind when you say that is people that perform, people that act, people that sing, people that do ventriloquism. Who knows?
Yeah.
You know, they all. I wonder whether the doll experiences anxiety. No, it's not a living thing. Just need to remind myself of that. So yeah, in those sorts of professions, anxiety is regularly dealt with, and it's actually a bad thing, a lot of people say, to not have anxiety before a performance. Comedians say this a lot. You know, if they're going up on stage and they haven't got that buzz about them, that anxious feeling, they're not going to be quick enough, they're not going to be sharp enough to respond.
Yeah, that's absolutely that's a really good point, actually, because often from what I understand, you know, the people who experience more anxiety can also be of a tendency to experience more like excitement and elation from that experience. You know, it's a sort of, it's a sensitivity thing as much as anything. And I think, you know, being able to kind of harness that feeling is quite a good thing. I know certainly from my perspective, you know, the best sort of musical performances of my life that I've given from a technical standpoint have been the ones where I've been most nervous. Admittedly, those weren't the ones where I had the most fun or was most relaxed. That would be like, you know, playing in a rock band at Party in the Park in the Village, or, you know, or whatever. But you know, playing quite difficult classical stuff, or at least difficult relatively speaking for me, you know, with like dozens and dozens of people there, or, you know, where, or maybe in like a grade 8 piano exam or something where the stakes are really quite high for you personally, you know, it's sort of, it's about harnessing that anxiety, I think. It's very different depending on what exactly you're trying to do, I think, as well, because in performance, it you know, again, it's helpful to split it along dimensions, I think, where like on the one hand, you've got it as a kind of, you know, its purpose being to entertain and that it's a medium of entertainment. And on the other, there is a certain desire for critical success, for acclaim, or for respect, or for achieving something kind of noteworthy. You know, and that's the case whether you're being assessed in an art subject at school or university or something, or whether you're, you know, whether you are actually a creative and you are trying to do something that will be reviewed and will be, you know, much like this soon-to-be award-winning Deep Chats podcast, you know.
Well, you speak wonderfully there, Joel, especially the end bit. But I totally get what you mean, and I think that can be kind of described as a conflict, and that feeling of anxiousness is felt as a conflict in a lot of ways. But yeah, that like wanting so desperately for something to be good, but then at the same time that maybe not being so beneficial to your performance, as sometimes it is better, sometimes it's not. But I think, and it's almost like you want to enjoy what you do, right? So I want to enjoy this, but I think if I put too much pressure on it, I'm not going to enjoy what I do. I'm not going to enjoy my job. And that's the whole point. The whole point of me wanting to do this is to enjoy my job and to not get caught in the traps of what would be considered a normal job existence, etc. I've messed that up near the end, but does that ring true?
Absolutely. And I think that the fact that you've clearly sort of run that analysis in your head before suggests that you are susceptible to it, to having that kind of meta level critique even as the process is going on. And I love how even this conversation has that kind of meta layer to it, where now I'm thinking like, Yeah, okay. I mean, I'm enjoying it so far, Ben. So
Yeah, we should just, if we get too meta, as happens when you do go too meta, it's just left with silence because there is no more you can say. You've kind of revealed the curtain so far back so many times that everyone's just naked and like just come out of the womb. It's that raw, and it's just that. Well,
yeah,
I don't really know what to say.
You've clearly thought about that a lot too, haven't you? There is that cliche, isn't there?
No.
Thinking about your audience naked or whatever. It's yeah.
I've got to pick that up. You know that change of voice that you just had. That is Captain Quark. That is where it stems from.
Oh,
have you seen the new PS5?
Yeah, I've seen the PS5 trailer for the new Ratchet and Clank game, which is exciting stuff. So yeah, just for context for listeners, I suppose, Ratchet and Clank is it's a PlayStation video game franchise that we both grew up with. Really, I certainly was absolutely obsessed with it, and still think about it now and again. Still play the games every day. No, okay, not every day, but you get the idea. And it was really formative for me, and it's an absolute joy to be one of the few franchises where I think I was there from the start, and it's had huge, critical success, is relatively popular, and to still see it thriving today, aside from a really shit movie, it's apart from that little segue, no offense to the people who made the movie, there's a reason why the Sly Cooper movie didn't happen after that, but anyway, Sly Cooper's another franchise. That's another story, isn't it? You'll have to shut me up, Ben. I won't. Well, I could just carry on about this stuff for days.
I know what you mean, though. Emotional connection to it, when you see something from its beginning, you do have an emotional connection to it because you feel like you've maybe somewhat contributed to that success, or you've lived vicariously through that. Almost.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's something wonderful about that.
I think to see how it formed a lot of parts of me, I guess it seems silly to a lot of people to describe a video game on those terms, but I became a sci-fi fan through Ratchet and Clank. It's these crazy weapons and alien planets, this alien and this robot teaming up and battling bad guys, and flying off to different cool worlds, crazy characters, great sense of humor, all of this stuff. And it's not just a love of science fiction, it then became a how did they make this thing? But what's going on behind the steering wheel of this as a video game, and looking at it from a more technical side, which they also excelled at, and here I am doing computer science. So it's no great secret to me. I even put it in my personal statement as the kind of opening, look at me, I'm charismatic and kind of human, sort of line. That was my first line, was like that video games were the starting point of all this.
So to ask a bit of a specific question. So you've obviously thought about how much Ratchet and Clank has formed who you are. If you were to put a percentage on how much of you has kind of like has been formed by the game. I mean, you can put it along axes or whatever of like how it's how it's affected your more academic thinking as opposed to your social thinking, like how to put a percentage on it.
Yeah, that's
how much.
That's really interesting. I mean, certainly I can't sort of. Yeah, it's difficult not to understate or overstate its influence. I think in percentage terms, it would be rather small, just because you have to think, well, okay, there's shit tons of music and politics and, my parents and friends and teachers and everything that kind of, there's a whole, anything you connect with in any way, really, it will shape you in some form or another to increasingly, cascadingly tiny percentages. But it's, it's got to be a sort of a few percent at least. It's got to be, something
3,
there.
4.
It has its own slice on the pie chart. That's what I'm getting at. But it's a really interesting thing actually. What I think is interesting with that game is so my ex-girlfriend had a Nintendo Switch, and she loved playing Super Mario Odyssey on it. And I was kind of baffled by the game mechanics. I had never played 3D Mario before, and this was sort of about a year and a half ago, and I was like, well, how did you know how to do that thing? Well, why did you throw that hat at that lamppost and coins came out of it or something? That makes no sense to me. But that's because the games that I was playing had a certain level of sort of believability to the physics. They were cartoony games, but they were also sort of science fiction in a slightly more plausible way. Yeah, exactly. So like every game franchise has its own kind of logic. It has its own set of kind of rules that you have to apply to the worlds that you're in to progress and to do well. Yeah, okay, a double jump is impossible, but like once you learn that that's a kind of set rule, you apply it. So I think I think it can be a really useful tool for children, actually, to say, like, yeah, I'm sure you wanted to get onto this, actually. I could see your eyes lighting up there.
Yeah. It's a shame that this doesn't have a visual component, because my eyes are just going out, and I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
me and you, because we've known each other for so long, we probably do share ways of thinking about things and topics that we naturally move on to and where our head goes. We probably share some sort of neuro pathways, if that's the right word. So yeah, and that was exactly where I was going to go to in terms of like kids and video games, and how like the games, although on the surface they can seem, violent or encouraging that sort of behaviour, or not relatable to the real world, when you look at the decisions that these kids have to make, or older people, constantly, they're developing something,
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think obviously, as children, the way that the brain is developing and adapting, it's a much more sort of malleable entity. It's more easily shaped, and so as we get older, to put it in the sort of simplest terms, you kind of you become more hardwired, you become more set in stone, It's why old people stubbornly don't change their views or adapt to the times that we live in, and it's why people develop a comfort zone with certain things. It's why older people struggle to learn new skills in quite the same way that children can as well. If we're talking in terms of the arts or in terms of language, for example,
it's pretty clear. Psychologically, in terms of studies, that is the case.
Yeah. And language is a really good example of that. Brits are put to shame by our quite terrible ability when it comes to learning foreign languages often, and a lot of that is set in school, because we start learning foreign languages seriously in most cases at age 11, and even then you're only sort of scratching the surface. And compared to other schools where they're speaking semi-fluently in a language by that age, it's just embarrassing. But that it shows, because then they can go on to learn other languages with a greater flexibility.
But what you're forgetting is us Brits have a special power in which, if we talk slower and louder to a foreign person in our own language, they actually understand it more. It's a power really only the Brits have, but I mean it's well known and widely appreciated by foreigners.
I will never forget. I hope my mum doesn't listen to this because it's really funny. But when we went to Bruges, this was my first ever holiday abroad. And they have, the stereotypes of Belgium in terms of like chip vans and chocolate and waffles everywhere or whatever. It really was like that at Bruges. It was heaven. I loved it there. Really fell in love with the place. And I remember we went to order some waffles. And the word for cream in Flemish, which is what they're speaking there, is slag
It's
room.
jizz.
No, it's slag room, which is, I mean, you're not far wrong. That's the crazy thing. So, of course, having my mom in particular sort of slowly and quite loudly saying the word slag room while sort of flailing her arms about as if that's going to make it clearer. Bless her. We did tease her a bit about it when my girlfriend came to meet my parents for the first time, because for context, my girlfriend's Latvian, and I'm going to see her tomorrow on a flight. I haven't seen her since February, so absolutely crazy. Fingers crossed it all goes well. It's a pretty precarious situation.
Don't speak too soon.
Yeah, but yeah, so when she came over for the first time in December to visit my parents, obviously we were recalling this, making the jokes, to just sort of, every time she'd walk into the room, when Mum came in, we would just sort of say hello to her, but in the loudest and most patronising possible terms. And yeah, but it makes for a good story, so
it does. That is the best thing. It's like, and even if you're on the receiving end, the bad end of that story, it's kind of, I think a way to think about these things is say you have an embarrassing moment, and you can always reassure yourself that it's a memory. I think, I think that's a good way to live, to go through the world, and coming if you're. Before you go into a scenario, if you think about the worst case scenario and how that could potentially be a memory, that's a nice softener. Because if it does happen, you go, bloody hell, that was awful, wasn't it? Well, at least I've got that one in the bank for if I do a podcast.
Yeah.
But I don't have many stories. My memory is so bad. It's probably where we differ. Mine sort of go down similar routes, but your memory is incredible. It far outweighs mine.
That's very kind of you. It's really funny you should say that, because my girlfriend's memory is absolutely impeccable, and it puts me to shame, honestly. Like, I thought my memory was fine, but like no, especially when you don't know how to revise for exams properly. Like, that's I was surprisingly grateful for online exams over handwritten exams this term, because I didn't have to remember everything. I could sort of have notes everywhere,
How was that? Like, how was that? Was that nerve-wracking? Because I haven't really had a chance to speak to you about it.
Yeah. So just for the listeners' sake, this is the first time me and Ben have actually properly spoken since. All of my exams were happening in late May and most of June. I had 30 hours of them, which is pretty crazy. And yeah, they were all online, so there was.
It's fucking ridiculous. More like that's fucking insane.
Trying to be political in my answer here, but I was very against the idea. I much preferred what some other unis were doing, where they had a safety net policy that was a kind of minimum threshold of saying, look, you've been working at a 2-1 so far. As long as you pass these exams, you're going to get a 2-1. You can do the exams. You don't have to do the exams. If you do the exams, you do well. Great, we'll take that. If not, fine. What Oxford did was do all of the exams online anyway. Almost all of their advice to candidates was assuming that we would type our exams before they realised that a lot of science degrees, ironically, computer science is the worst suited degree to do exams on a computer, because half of what I write is like Greek symbols and stuff, so it's a nightmare to type. So I only did my 2 sort of essay-based subjects typed, and all the others, handwriting, scanning them on my phone through Office Lens, and emailing them in, praying that my internet connection held up, and it was very peculiar. It wasn't the process that I was most frustrated by. I didn't mind the process, because you kind of get that like home comfort element of like, this is my desk and I can put the work around, wherever I want. I can eat, I can drink, I can wear what I want. It's, exactly.
You can visualize beforehand where you're going to be, the exact, you can almost practice for it.
Yeah, exactly. But what I was very unhappy with and very concerned about were how it was sort of how they would account for the differences in people's home and living standards, and like the environments that they're working in, the environments they're revising in, how the pandemic has affected everybody individually, and also, frankly, collusion and cheating. Because of course, what's to stop a third of the computer scientists in my year from being on a fucking messenger chat whilst they're doing the paper, you know? Sorry.
If it wasn't before, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I mean, that would definitely apply here, because it could be who you. I mean, you could be literally on the computer to, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a official term for someone really high up in the computer science domain. But do they have titles like that?
You mean nerd or? I'm allowed to make that joke. I'm allowed to make that joke. Although, but this is the funny thing. So, like, I'm not, as an Oxford student, very well integrated into the department at all, to be honest. For a start, because I'm a computer science and philosophy student, which is this kind of rogue corner of niche indie hipster people that want to do something kind of cool and different. I'm really talking out my arse at this point. I'm very sorry to every CompPhil. CompPhil is an awesome degree, and I'm really glad I did it. But yeah, it does mean that you're kind of slightly in a bit of a corner. You don't do as much in computer science, and also on a personal level, you know, someone who was a bit more isolated and introverted through most of my time at uni so far, and also was extraordinarily busy in that first term where a lot of people kind of bed in and make friends and things. My priority was just finding a close-knit group in college rather than in the department. So I'd say I'm getting more familiar with it now, but it's sort of too little too late. I certainly don't, you know, I'm certainly not quite as well integrated or part of the kind of in crowd, if you like. Not that there really is such a strong hierarchy when it's like Oxford students, you know, it's like, but you get the idea.
I feel like it's quite it's a big thing everywhere, feeling isolated and lonely, especially now, but before coronavirus at uni it's really prevalent, and I've definitely experienced it, and it's difficult because you are doing a degree where you really want to do well, and I think in most instances, in order to create a social circle, you maybe need to join a society or two, and you need to really commit to that. And couple that with maybe your first time being outside the house and living on your own. It's such a difficult mix for young people to find people that they can really trust and gel with and like confide in over such a short amount of time and such a crucial portion of their life. It's so difficult. I don't know what your specific experience was, whether you had a low point in uni being on your own, or
I think it's really good what you said, actually. I think there's a real it's something I thought a lot in first term of first year, where I had a pretty rough time of it, and it was very stressful for me, especially because I picked the one college that had like a maths week before freshers week. I mean, seriously.
That's how you get the party really started.
But yeah, that I really panicked and really struggled with that, and went home to spend some time with my ex literally that weekend afterwards. But that whole term, I was very busy and hardly keeping up with work, and it was all, you know, a bit mad. And what was really interesting is that, you know, I would see people that I was, you know, getting to know during this first term who seemed like they were managing it a lot better. They seemed a lot happier. They seemed sort of, or not so much happier, sort of, they would joke about the stress. They would joke about the exhaustion, but there was this counterbalancing kind of excitement and sort of, you know, real anticipation about everything, and a real kind of like, yeah, this is going to be lit. This is going to be really cool. And I couldn't quite get that. And as it turns out, what's really interesting, so some people I think genuinely were experiencing it in that way, and it was really positive for them, and that, you know, that's fantastic. I think naturally more extroverted and confident people you know, will experience that, but I think a lot of people were sort of joining in with that to sort of fake it until you make it, in a kind of not in a bad way, you know, just in a way that was kind of, you know, wanting to have a good time and really, really kind of worried about having that good time. And the greatest irony of it was that, like, I would turn up in second term and I was doing a little bit better with second term because I'd managed to kind of get a little bit less busy, put it all into perspective. And I said to a couple of people, like, you know, how does this compare to first term? And they said, oh, yeah, no, this is a lot better. First term was kind of rough, actually. And some of those people, you know, not exactly, but some of those people were the ones who were kind of, you know, they would post on social media saying, oh my God, this was the best first start to uni that I could have wished for. I've met some amazing people, blah, blah, blah. And okay, the you know, the friends you've made, that might be a really special thing, but that doesn't seem to speak to the experience that I now recall most people having. And that's a really interesting thing, I think. Whereas I was perhaps a bit more open about it at the time, I think.
And you can't really be too angry at someone's Instagram post. You're like, that's not a fair representation of your life. Why are you doing that? Because it's like, well, yeah, of course it isn't. That's what Instagram is. Like, I should know this by now. It's not everything that you see. It's not all the complexities of someone's life, and you know, people shouldn't be made to give a fair representation and tell everyone the shit stuff. But it does speak to something larger, which is so interesting culturally with social media and everything, and this fake it till you make it, and this sort of like convincing yourself that everything's okay, and I don't know whether that's good for you or bad for you. I think honesty is lacking in today's society, and that's what I love about podcasts. You have the time to explore things and to be honest, and for someone not to misconstrue what you're saying as much, because you've got it in this huge context of a conversation where you can really analyze who that person is and get a better picture. But today, it doesn't. I don't feel like there's as much of that honesty, even from person to person, especially amongst the younger generation. Because if you come into this world and then naturally you're making assumptions, you're figuring stuff out from what's out there, and if what's out there is this two-dimensional, superficial in many ways thing of social media, you might think, oh, that's how we interact, that's how I need to be. I need to keep things in and give an external image of myself. But then that is sort of counterbalanced with the amount of good stuff that's on social media, the amount of positive messages that I feel like I want to compare social media to a drug almost, that we didn't know the side effects of until a little bit later. So it's like a drug, and we released it to everybody. It was free for everyone. And then we saw what was happening with it. And through giving it to everyone, we learnt its cons and its pros. Yeah. And now it's been around for a while. We can really, the evidence is there. We can really start to see why it's bad for people and why it's good for people. And then hopefully in the future we can, people are starting to educate people on when not to use this drug, when to use it, sort of thing.
I think that's a brilliant comparison, actually, Ben. I really like that, because it's kind
I'm full of them, Joel. Come on, you should know this by now.
No, but it's I think it speaks to this wider characteristic of society, where we kind of, or even pre-society, just as a species, we are a species that learns empirically and inductively in a lot of cases. And yes, we can reason analytically, but when it comes to the phenomenon in the external world, it's we learn a lot of the time by trial and error. We bump into things and we make mistakes, and we discover something that has an immediate benefit or has an immediate short-term, advantage, and often fail as a collective group to fully understand it or regulate it or test it or whatever it is. This goes as far back as alcohol, or much more recently things like cigarettes, or things, certain kinds of political thought, for example. You could make the same comparison with free market capitalism, because it offers this benefit of seemingly endless economic growth that has helped develop a lot of societies and improve a lot of people's net wealth and things. But of course, that gravy train is running out and will continue to run dry, and it is unsustainable, and it's not forever. And it's sort of, as we can see in politics, not to get too political at this point, but the chickens are coming home to roost in that sense. And I think it's this similar thing of like, people are so quick to latch on to the benefits of something, and often I think there is an awareness of the problems, but it's it's easier to brush them under the carpet. It was easy for Zuckerberg to not worry about regulating social media. It was easy for Instagram to not worry about, banning profiles that were committing hate speech and, showing videos of violence and things. It was okay for Twitter to be, not banning neo-fascism, for example. And it's a similar thing, I think, where it's like it's easier to do that until forced to make that change. And I think maybe as a generation we have to look at social media, on those terms now, and think, I don't think we're stupid with it. I think we know, our generation knows that it can be very superficial, that it can give a lot of people an awful lot of low self-esteem, and it becomes this sort of toing and froing of like showing your best face to one another. But I think there is a counter movement to that now. I think there is a sort of growing sense of, let's be honest about what our bodies look like and what we feel like, and all sorts of things. It's just whether that's sort of, at the moment, it's a bit of a niche fashion, I think. It needs to extrapolate, it needs to bed in, I think, maybe. But.
And I suppose the other problem with social media is, and I suppose things like YouTube, is we can choose what we want to take in. We can block out the stuff we don't want to take in. So we can live in our own bubble and not get those messages. That is easy enough to do. And even the algorithm plays to that. They want to keep you in your own bubble because that's what will keep you engaged. But I want to bring back to a point that you said, like, humans, almost a part of human nature is we try things and we get things wrong. And it's the two sides. It's that, I think that is so true of humans, and that in my perspective of the world, I want to give the benefit of the doubt. But I don't want to be too liberal with that. I want to give the benefit of the doubt once, twice, but I don't want to give them people a free rein, because then you get the other side, which is the Zuckerbergs, who, again, it's easy. They can, or some people where they can make a mistake, but then they're going into this knowing that they're making a mistake, but then have the get out clause of going, oh, it was a mistake. Come on, everyone makes mistakes. Yeah. So it's such a difficult balance. I mean, I think that the line is probably, should definitely be drawn where people are in society. If they hold positions which are huge, they should be held to account more. They should, because they've got more responsibility. But on a micro level, I think sometimes people are too quick to categorize a person, to cancel them, to write them off when they have just made a mistake and they are a human being. And it is whether they learn from that mistake, which is the most important part, and whether they truly seriously take stuff on board. And I feel like another sort of separate point is we need to normalize people being able to change their minds, people being able to it not be embarrassing to be wrong. It should be totally accepted and like almost encouraged, go into something and be wrong. And I think that culture exists in a work sense. I don't know whether it exists in a personal sense, because in a work sense, I think it's greatly encouraged to be like, go into things. If you fail, it doesn't matter how many times you fail. It's you getting up and trying again. But in a personal way, when you come to politics, beliefs, ideas about the world, people that they struggle to change their mind because it hurts. It hurts to have to like reconstruct your whole view about the world, and you've worked so hard to build it up.
Yeah, we almost need a sort of purge day where we all kind of start from bedrock and just remove all our preconceived beliefs and just try and build it back up again, like sort of Descartes style. I think, therefore I am. But
you heard it first.
But it's really interesting. I think you can draw a really nice link between sort of the start of what you're saying and the end of what you're saying, in that this sense of like having your kind of set of preconceived beliefs and wanting there's a sort of with a lot of people there's a real desire to reinforce those beliefs and to discard evidence that seems to render your own beliefs inconsistent. I think it's why politically we are where we are, and I think where the really interesting link is that you're making is to the role that social media is playing in this. It's why we have political bubbles in social media. People, through the use of machine learning, essentially that's what it is, through Twitter's ability to find you relevant tweets or people politically, and Google's ability to tailor your Google News feed to the sort of stuff that you would enjoy reading or engage in reading. It offers a greater weighting to evidence and news and views and opinions that correlate with your own. And I think, people like that because there's only a certain dosage with which we want to be challenged, I think it's really important for people to sort of reevaluate their beliefs, or at the very least to sort of, I think there almost is a bit of a duty for every individual to sort of engage in a little bit of critical thinking, and it's not so easy for so many people because we've got lives to live. It's easy for me. I do logic as like a third of my degree. It's easy for me to sit around and like muse about philosophy or politics or some or modern technology or something. But like people have got mouths to
Ratchet
feed.
and Clank.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be
Slag
awful.
Room, whatever it was.
It'd be awfully hypocritical of me to just say everyone should be able to engage sort of ancient Greek philosophy style in this kind of discourse, but to sort of at least go about verifying the information they're seeing on social media, maybe once in a while actively seeking out a counter argument and seeing how they might kind of maybe be persuaded by it, maybe allow that to come into their set of views and beliefs. But I think
there
it
is
is. Sorry, go on.
No, I just interrupted you there, but I'm going to take this interruption. You can see the ground, and I am latching onto it. There is this culture of if you even listen to the other side, that means you're agreeing with them, and that means you agree with everything that they say, and therefore you are awful, and we can't that you're a bad person. And it's so much. I get it, because of course that makes sense on a base level. Yes, the vast majority of people, the vast majority of people that listen to something listen to something regularly are likely to agree with a lot of what's said, but it doesn't mean that they agree with everything, and there isn't that appreciation of, or that encouragement to listen to another side and be able to critically think about it and be like, wait, where could I be going wrong here? In one way, you could look at it as, if you're really staunchly for certain beliefs, you could be like, okay, what are the other side thinking? Because if I know what the other side are thinking, then I can better combat that.
Yeah.
Or I think, again, a slight side point, but when people say check your, say, like, white privilege, I think that makes sense, and that is totally right. And I think in the same sort of style, I would maybe make that a term for everyone, in terms of saying, check your confirmation bias here. Just check it. Check it for a second and be like, wait, check who I am. Check where my head is going, what I've taken in, whether I'm trying to just reaffirm what I know here. But a lot of these problems, they come down to language as well. What people are living by, even if it's slightly different definitions, that has huge repercussions, because then what I'm saying is different to what you're hearing. And there can be really, it can get people really angered. I know, like, there's a particular section of the online community, I think potentially the alt-right, you could say, or that gets quite angry at the word feminism. And I think they're living by different definitions.
Yeah.
When someone on the right hears the word feminist, they're trying to overstep their reach, and they're trying to make things unequal, and they're trying to just take over, and they're extreme, whilst other people that are feminists, they wear feminism on themselves as a badge, because they should do, because their definition is, we're trying to reach equality here. You know what I mean? And
it's about sort of steering the ship, like correcting course in a certain sense. So it's like, yes, you might be advocating things, more to women's favour, but that's only to sort of counterweight what's been going on. Sorry, I don't know if my audio went crap there. There was some sort of lorry or something driving past. But yeah, I think it's... I think you make a really good point, and particularly on what you were saying about the alt-right, I think there are two strands to the right in terms of their approach to feminism. So one, or rather three, because obviously there's the sort of liberal conservative that actually would identify as a feminist, but their disagreement is in how to enact feminism, and they would argue it's about, the state not interfering, ensuring equality of opportunity, but then they're completely ignoring the deep-rooted issues, particularly economically. For example, the way that austerity has negatively impacted women more than it has men, and minorities more than it has white people, etc. But then there are these two other strands of right-wing thinking, I think. One of them sees it exactly as you've described, that feminism is a movement that is pushing to make women the better sex, and the superior sex, and that they're taking it too far and it's ridiculous or whatever. Frankly, I just don't buy it. I don't understand what they're really getting at. But I think it's very similar with the Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. The people saying All Lives Matter, well, it's
without
a
the
thing.
context,
it's a funny
without
thing.
the context of the time.
Yeah.
Like, if someone had said that 2-3 years ago, I think the people, like, everybody would agree with that, but it's just the context of the time where it's just...
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Yeah, all lives matter, you're right. But you can't say that as a kind of counter-statement to Black Lives Matter. No one's saying that there are some kinds of lives that don't matter. You're not making a claim there. You're not making a counter-argument. You're not doing anything apart from throwing your toys out of the pram because you don't like the fact that there is a very pressing issue. If you think all lives matter, why aren't you there at the protests? Why aren't you there educating yourself about the very pressing issues that are going on here, about the institutional racism, not just in the police, but in other wider institutions such as politics and in legal institutions as well, in businesses, etc., etc. you know, and then, but what's really interesting, just to circle back, to there's this third strand that at least I can identify in right-wing politics, which is a very like traditionalist conservative streak, which is kind of actually that they sort of think women should be seen as the inferior sex. You know, there is amongst many a sort of an even stronger than nuclear family kind of stereotype that women are simply the nurturers and bearers of children, and that they, you know, that's unfortunately, you know, it's grounded predominantly in certainly in the West in fundamentalist Christianity and a refusal to let go of that as we become increasingly secular and science-led. You see it in the Middle East, for example, in very different circumstances under, fundamentalist religion again. And obviously they are kind of, in general, not to generalize too much, but sort of on the whole, they are decades behind us in terms of how strong a presence religion is in their institutions and in their day-to-day culture. And I think that's why you see the subjugation of women a lot more. But it's still a pressing issue in the West. I think really Scandinavia and the Baltic states and some countries in Central Europe, I think, are really leading the way here. I certainly know from my girlfriend as a Latvian, you know, we've had all sorts of conversations about this, and they are ahead of the curve on us, you know, on this stuff.
In terms of gender,
in terms of gender equality, in terms of it sort of not being an issue, like. You know, from their perspective, they could quite easily think that feminism is sort of a dirty word because there's no need for it in Latvia. So from their perspective, it would seem like it's taking these too far because there's not an issue there so much. I mean, there's a near negligible pay gap. You know, it is still there, but it is, you know, lower than ours. But it's, you know, this nuclear family notion of like the hunter-gatherer father going out and bringing home the bacon and all of this stuff. I think we still have work to do on that, and you know, we're making progress, but then we are, you know, you and I are not in the place to say that mission is complete, or even to really definitely evaluate how much left there is to come. You know, it's not quite up to us, but
well, absolutely. I feel like everyone should take anything that is said on any podcast, but especially this podcast.
Disclaimer halfway through the show.
You lie, Joel. It comes at the start every single time. But I think you should take everything that we say with a pinch of salt. You know, we're not making any illusions of who we are here. We're just two people having a conversation, and we're so ready to be wrong. We don't think we're right about everything. This isn't a preach. It's just you just listening to a conversation, although we have made multiple references to the fact that listeners are here. But anyway, yes, that it's difficult because it's like you don't. There are differences biologically between the genders, of course, but it's like, how far does that go? Do we know? And maybe to even play devil's advocate with you, or to counter what you're saying, to explore the thought, is that how much do those little differences in gender to gender, how do they extrapolate? How do they go further in life? So say that men have testosterone. They have a tendency to be, because I don't know the biology. They have a tendency to be more aggressive. So how does that then go into real life? How does that mean men make different, on average, different job choices? Do they go into more physical, manual labor type jobs naturally because that's where their genetics are? And is that changing? How much does that, you know, do you see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I think is worth clarifying, because in these sorts of discussions that unfortunately, you know, we do have to have this nuance to it. It's, you know, there is this difference here between biological sex and gender, and it's, you know, it's the idea of gender is sort of, it's different in the sense that that is the mechanism by which one may identify as a different gender while still belonging to the biological sex to which they were born or something like that. But just sort of for simplicity in this discussion, just kind of setting aside those cases for one moment and just talking about it as men and women. Not, unfortunately, that's the easiest way to talk about it in the majority of cases. To talk about it along those terms, I think there is a natural tendency for men to lean towards some roles maybe and women to lean towards others. But the thing is that, given the way society is at the moment, given the way that we are all to an extent socially conditioned, we don't know whether that's true. That's the thing. You can't experiment on this because you can't raise children in a magic cube where you control exactly what they're exposed to in terms of their influences. And even then, you need a ridiculously large sample size of individuals with different genetic makeup and different hormone levels, all sorts of things. So it's difficult to separate what is, the sort of natural delta and the environmental delta, if you like, the kind of the differences that are created by the kind of toys that we play with and the things that our parents and teachers say to us. This generation-old problem now of teachers encouraging boys to go into maths and engineering and physics and so on, and for girls to go into at the most academic kind of biological sciences or something, but otherwise more towards the arts or the humanities or something. And it's really difficult to separate out, I think, the impact of that versus any kind of natural variation. I'd imagine there's some natural variation because, that we have different biological characteristics. And again, this is talking strictly in terms of biological sex rather than gender.
Yes, I fucked that up earlier.
No, don't worry. Right. Like, it's so easy to conflate the two. And the thing is that, again, like, I think, I could never be offended by a conflation like that, knowing that you have, in my eyes, very progressive credentials, but I love that smile. Love that smile. And the moustache, by the way. I had to mention it at some point. It's first time I'm seeing this, so...
We should reference it, and I should reference that Oh, you're stroking it right now.
Stroking that wonderful something. Yeah.
Well, that's it. What are we talking about here? Is it a beard or is it goatee? Because I had that similar style of facial hair until I moved to the moustache. It's been quite the exploration. Facial hair. It's been quite the exploration for me. But I've settled on a moustache for now with a slight soul patch. But yourself, how would you define that?
It's I'd define it as laziness. It's a kind of Shaggy style, like not as long as Shaggy, but a similar kind of colour and just kind of. Yeah. There's the sideburns to it, and then there's a bit of a kind of bit of a dry patch as you move towards the chin. I never thought I'd be expecting to describe my beard in this level of detail, but I kind of just love that we can go with that. It's. For listeners' sake, I mean, me and Ben have known each other since we were very young and can just basically talk about any old shit and still get a laugh out of it. I mean, not to circle too much.
A laugh for ourselves and ourselves only, as the listeners are probably finding out. Yeah,
that's so true.
We can get a laugh out of it. Yeah, for ourselves, but for anyone else listening,
I have a lovely little story about this. Actually, I don't know if you'll remember this, but so when we first became kind of really sort of best friends around 7 or 8 years old, and this is kind of weirdly circling back to Ratchet and Clank. I mean, how could it not? There was a time where this was in class 2 of our little village primary school, and we had a little show and tell day, and I wanted to talk to everyone about Ratchet and Clank, and I had to get Ben up to like riff with me a little bit. We sort of quoted this scene. It's like one of the infobots or like the sort of coordinates to one of the planets or something about the arena battle or whatever. I can't even remember for the life of me how it goes. It's something like that kind of...
You are scratching at the scratch card of my memory right now. And there's a number coming up. It's sort of... I'm and it's incredible when this happens, and it's probably one of the most joyous feelings I can ever have is when someone uncovers a memory that you kind of forgot about. And now I'm transported to Mrs. Ackenley's face for some reason, and I'm just oh god, I'm in Church Broughton. I'm remembering class 2. I'm remembering being in year 3. That's weird, but joyous.
And
sorry, go on.
I was too shy to say it, so I got you to come up with me, and neither of us could remember how it went, but Mrs. Hopkinson was pissing herself laughing, probably at us. We thought we were really cool at the time, but... I know. It was the one that was like, ask yourself, are you man enough, hero enough, insane enough to enter the arena with 2 of the fiercest gladiators in the galaxy? If you answer yes, you're a big, fat liar. And we thought we were so cool for that. I mean, to be fair, though, I think our sense of humour has definitely been shaped by stuff like that. This is why I stick with that particular gaming franchise, because oh my god, the jokes they managed to sneak into this, right? These games, just for context, were rated 3+, okay? Right? And there's a line where a character who is meant to be like a Bill Clinton parody, like a president-style character, he says, I'm going to mess up the line now, but he says something like, Ratchet, my daughter tells me you're a man that's good with his hands. And then he's like, no, sir, I swear, I never like that. And he cuts her off, and it's like, how the hell have
I
they
did not have sexual relations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then there's a bit with Captain Quark where he's he's like this sort of celebrity superhero of the franchise. He's a coward. He's very surface level. He's really cowardly and really dumb and whatever. He retreats to this jungle. That
was played by me during the class 2.
Yes, it totally was
role play. I slipped into that role just too well.
Yeah,
dumb. And bulky. What can I say?
Actor from an early age, Ben. I remember fondly. But there was this amazing scene where he befriends this monkey from this jungle planet and sort of brings him with him back to like superhero life. He's having this conversation with him. Obviously, you can't understand what the monkey's saying, but then he's like, he's sort of saying to Scrunch the monkey, he's like, I thought we put all that jungle business behind us. It was mating season. How could I have known she was your sister? And it's like, how did they get that in?
3+.
How did they? Yeah, 3+.
That's true.
How did they get that in? They had a gadget called the crotchetizer, right? They had,
and it was a dildo.
I mean, it might as well have been. It was literally like a massive... I think it was like a massive claw that you can And then there was the personal hygienator, the full body waxinator, and he's like, Captain Quark's a test dummy for this, and he's kind of, riffing to all these other little test subjects about this full body waxinator or whatever. He's like, I can tell you now, I'm sporting a smooth chassis, and there are no tags on my luggage. And it's golden. It's absolute gold. How did they get that in?
When I talked about your memory earlier in this, that is proof of it right there. You can remember almost line for line. I mean, I remember you being able to do a really good impression. You can do loads, but really good impression of Vector from Despicable Me. And I just, even though I don't know the specific line, like just the way you say it and the words you use, I'm like, that has got to be pretty near to what was actually said in the film. Yeah. And that just is testament to your memory. And now you do have to do that impression, unfortunately.
That's very kind of you, but I actually, that's the one that slipped out of my head. Oh, God, it's the bit at the Bank of Evil, right? It's the bit where he first meets him.
Come on, don't crumble under the pressure, Joel. There's 5 people listening.
Oh, great. No, it's the bit where it's like, I'm applying for a new villain loan, goes by the name Vector. It's a mathematical term represented by an arrow with both direction and magnitude. And then Gru is like sat on the other side of the seat, and he goes and like slides. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one where he's like, that's me, Vector, because I'm committing crimes with both direction and magnitude. Oh yeah, and then he's like thrusting, and
then he thrusts.
Oh.
And that is the height of comedy for us. A good old thrust, a good old Pooh Willy joke. I cannot deny. Like, I don't care whether it's lowbrow. A fart noise at the right time is just a joyous moment, and potentially the pinnacle of comedy.
Well, I think
context.
I think a really good example of this, which came from yourself actually, and influenced me very heavily recently, was Brass Eye's Pedogeddon. Because like me and Cam, my brother, we were just talking about this literally yesterday or something, hailing it as probably like, you know, among the, if not the best piece of televised satire on British TV, because it's
so good.
Like, okay, not so much now because it's out of context, but if you understand the context of the time, the sort of parodying of BBC Panorama style shows and the mad hysteria that comes with their exploration of social issues and their sort of bloodthirst for chaos and things like this,
and just the way that they address the camera, everything is too serious.
Yeah, exactly. And that, like, you can tell that Chris Morris had huge success with that piece of satire, because the very next day he was on all the front pages with Pedogeddon being criticised and lambasted. Of course, one of those papers, I think it was The Sun, but I don't want to slander them, so I'm not going to say it definitely was.
Sorry, you don't want to slander The Sun? Well, legally. Okay. Right. In any other cut.
Oh, I'd love to slag off that paper all day long, but it's whether it's factually correct or not, you know. A bunch of wankers at that paper, but that's not the but
God, I wish the children were just dying out. No, actually, but come on, that's too much.
Yeah, it's but I'm pretty sure one of the papers had on their front page not just a complaint about Brass Eye and their approach to, you know, that they're not taking paedophilia seriously or whatever, and accompanying that on the front page was, I think, something, it was like about 13-year-old girls in bikinis or something. It was very weird. I might have to look this up while we're talking, just so that I can get this actually sort of correct. I'm going to also kind of still attempt to talk into the microphone with my head leaning back. So just to clarify, and I'm glad I did look this up actually, because it wasn't The Sun, amazingly. So the Daily Star, their article calling Brass Eye's episode sick, was positioned adjacent to an article about the developing bust of 15-year-old singer Charlotte Church. And the Daily Mail's coverage was preceded by close-ups of quote-unquote bikini princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, who were 12 and 11 at the time. So that's why I herald that as amazing satire, because it succeeded in its mission. It proved exactly like the hypocrisy and hysteria and pseudo outrage of these news outlets and entities that don't actually seem to give a shit and are actually, they have a thirst for this kind of thing. They love this, you know, they revel in it because it helps them. And also at the same time, weird pedo jokes, you know, it's like like it is juvenile, it is really silly, but it succeeds on those terms, you know, that bit about the guy disguised as a school, and that, you know, sending a paedophile off into space, and then like the scientists were shocked to discover an 8-year-old boy was trapped on board or whatever, you know, the
this is the exact thing they didn't want to happen. Yeah.
And then the Eminem parody, the guy JL Bate, who is the he's like, he has a rap song where he's like a rap artist, the founder of New Ass Music, who dates girls as young as 8 or whatever. It's it's hysterically funny. It's so good.
Now, You referencing the Star, or was it the Sun? No, it was the Star article, the Daily Mail article.
Yeah.
Now, what that sort of brought to mind for me was, you know how in today's times there is a feeling that satire is dead and everything is so crazy and so ridiculous. The comedy is in the real stuff, which is horribly scary. But then when you reference that article, that's awful stuff. So I don't know whether this feeling that everything's getting worse almost is that as true as it could be?
That's a really good question.
Because that what you just referenced there, like that wouldn't happen today. So maybe it's changed. The dynamics have changed, and in certain areas it's getting worse. But I don't know.
Yeah,
I think on the whole it is getting worse, just per se. But
yeah, so
I don't know.
So to give my kind of my best, but probably still quite mediocre analysis of this. I think.
Hey, whoa! You gave your judgment an 8 to 10, Joel.
Oh,
you've got to live by that.
Yeah.
You can't say mediocre. That would be a 5 or 6, maybe a 4.
Yeah, all right. I'm amazing. I admit it. So the way I see it personally, and obviously it's subjective. It's not based on much else other than kind of my own experience with things. I think on the lines of sort of social and cultural sort of progressiveness and how dire the circumstances are, and such as that, like that media hypocrisy that we just talked about, for example, that is falls into that category. I think by and large things were getting a lot better through the 21st century, and have maybe declined in the last few years. I think around Brexit time, and there has been a bit of an insurgence of the sort of social right, if you will, because think about it. We legalised gay marriage. And there have been improved civil liberties generally, particularly under Blair. Blair did do some good. I'm not at all.
And in the West, we should specify as well.
Yeah. Of course, I'm sort of within the confines of the UK predominantly, but also there's no page 3 in the Sun in the same way that there used to be, and that sort of thing. And there's a kind of there is a sense that progress has been made. There's better representation in the media. That's particularly a very prominent conversation happening now. There are gay relationships, minority communities better represented in the media. It's in our soaps, it's in our dramas, our comedies, our adverts, and I think inherently that's a good thing. I think it's been a long time coming. I have my view changes slightly when it feels very contrived and forced and the writing suffers for it, but that's a very separate issue. But then, of course, we've not just got to think about that. We've got to think about the economics, So whilst on a social level, I think things have been getting better and generally more liberal until the last few years, on an economic level, yes, net wealth was improving and, people's livelihoods were improving again through the earlier half of the 21st century. But this last decade has been ruinous. It has been an utter car crash. It's been, one clusterfuck after another. And, by their own terms, the governing party have failed in almost every measure over the last decade, and on anyone else's terms as well. And I think it's important to separate those things. I picked my political battle years ago, and it was always going to be the left-wing economics. It was always, I'm a straight white male. I can't, it's not me that should be. Okay, yes, I should be an ally to any progressive cause as best I can, but it shouldn't be my voice at the forefront of that. Not that it is, that would be grandiose and pretentious, but you get the idea. Yeah. Like it's, I can only sort of best play some sort of support role in that, whereas I have a lot more to say on the economics, I think. But
yes, and I think yes, economically, it's gotten just a bit too far. But I think that there's a conspiracy theory, or a theory, depending on how you look at it, that big corporations and people that are currently benefiting from the economic system, how it is, they are willing to fully endorse this conversation around, what shall I call it? The more identity politics side, is that the right term?
Yeah, or kind of, if you give me an example of the sort of thing you're talking about.
So a lot of brands have come out and they've supported these causes, which is great.
Oh, so do you mean like LGBTQ plus coffee cups and things like this? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, and well, not really. Just they are supporting what is popular. And there is a theory out there that they are doing that, and they're trying to keep the conversation geared towards that. Not to say it isn't important, of course it is so important, but they're trying to make people focus on that and get consumed by that so that they don't notice the economic structures that are at play here. And it's like they're conceding a bit of ground, because if they didn't concede that ground, then all of their ground would be gone. So they are being tactical, these corporations, in it's like, I've been watching The Crown recently, which I may say is absolutely fantastic. It's shot stunningly, the storylines brilliant.
Paid promotion here.
and the acting's great, but it's like the monarchy, they conceded ground. They knew they were never gonna live in all power forever, because they saw all these revolutions happening. So they conceded the ground to keep themselves having some of the benefits which they have. And I feel like, again, this is a theory, in that corporation sense, they are trying to concede that ground to prolong their stay at the top, the actual stuff that matters to them, which, yeah, I mean, we're going to support all this, we'll do all the branding for all these causes, but really, if the money's coming in as it is, we don't really care. We're not going to make that big of a push for your causes, because, you know, it's superficial. I mean, that's the theory.
Yeah. No, I think I really like that analysis of it. I don't know whether I can sort of... I think where it goes from being a theory to a conspiracy theory is when you think that it's kind of truly systematic in a really important sense. So like that these companies have all these sort of secret meetings where they discuss, you know, where they're sort of open about it, and that there's this top layer of this hierarchy where they're open about it. I think it's more that it sort of just happens by the nature of what we reward economically. You know, we place entrepreneurship and corporations in, you know, on a bit of a pedestal, really, because of their supposed crucial importance in keeping the economy going and making things grow and grow and grow. And obviously they are very important, but you know, but I think, yeah, I like the analysis that you're giving there, because I think our generation as a whole actually is quite cynical towards business, I think, because I think we, or rather sort of, you know, private enterprise, because I think we have been let down. I think we've been let down by the framework in which we've grown up, particularly millennials, you know, that are, so because we're sort of on the cusp of millennial to Gen Z. So like, you know, the people who are in their late 20s now, for example, you know, it's a difficult one, because you know, it's a difficult one because you don't know how to resolve it, because like, if it isn't systematic, if it isn't purposeful, but is still a bit kind of cynical and nonetheless does happen, then it's kind of like, who's at fault here? It's sort of like the whole system is at fault there. But I think you make a really good point about corporations ceding ground in some sense to appease progressives in general, offering a kind of sideshow from the real economic injustice. I think obviously I would say that I do think you can relate all of these things back to a sort of systematic economic injustice, that, you know, even all the social injustices are kind of rooted in that fundamentally, because it's about your net welfare and quality of life, and, you know, unfortunately that all proceeds through wealth creation and, you know, maintenance and income and things. So Yeah, I think a really good comparison is like how the way that Margaret Thatcher said her best accomplishment was Tony Blair, and the way that when John McDonnell went to Davos, there were a couple of people who were sort of saying, you know, that maybe a little bit of social democracy was a good thing, as if that was like, well, you know, we'll retain the reins of power ultimately, but if we give the dog a bone temporarily, give them a term of social democracy, a bit of investment, you know, then the people will be happy enough for the system to continue as it is, and it wouldn't be truly transformative. So I think those are good comparisons to make.
That is a perfect critique of what I just said, and makes total sense in terms of, it's difficult to put a face to this, and if it is like people gathering in groups, all the elites, and whether it's actually that structured or something, that's where it does range into conspiracy, I think. But the Bilderberg group.
Wait, what? What's this?
The Bilderberg? You know Bilderberg?
No, I don't. What is this? What is this?
All right. Whack it up on Google now. You know the Bilderberg.
I do. I think I'm just an uncultured swine. How do you spell it?
Oh, you know me, Joel. That's the worst question you could ever ask me.
Oh, okay. No. I got it. Hold on.
So this is where people are invited to all wear the most powerful people, say, in society. I might be getting this wrong, but come to this forest and they all stand in robes.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I know the one.
Flaming birds that they all watch go up, and it's like that fact alone that exists does just make me question. It really gives. It leads me more towards that side. It is evidence for that more conspiratorial sort of thinking.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Actually, I think, I do know what you're talking about now. I didn't know it by name, but it's kind of like a cult version of Davos by the sounds of it. But it's it's. I think so. When I first sort of came into political thinking, it was largely in opposition to Murdoch. It was largely a sort of, you know, the right-wing press were the enemy, and I didn't even fully understand left-right before that, you know, but it was kind of, I saw corruption, and I saw that was my kind of starting point. I saw David Cameron and George Osborne going to fancy dinners with Rupert Murdoch and co, and, you know, their families, you know, all exchanging hugs and kisses and chatting about all kinds of stuff, and you realise, okay, they're all on the same team here, and that is systematic.
Stop right there. They're all on the same team here. I need to go pee so bad. Carry on that thought.
I may also go pee.
That's great news.
You timed that stupendously well. I literally went to the loo and got a glass of water and came back, and we both sat down at the same time.
And we both sighed with that sweet moment of relief. You just sit down after. I'm not going to lie to you, Joel. I went for a wee. A poo came out as well. And can I further go to say that I have heard before the lie that you cannot pee and poo at the same time. Evidence right there. What I just witnessed was evidence to the contrary from that belief. Because I swear I saw that on Brainiac or something, that you can't pee and poo at the same time.
Well,
I did, and it was delicious.
Oh God!
Sorry.
I feel like I need to ask Ben. Are you sure everything's working okay down there? Like that seems to be a consensus, maybe for a reason. No, I think you can have like one followed in quick succession by the other, or like, you know. But I think it's that they're like
the same time, Joel. And no, I don't think everything is okay down there. I'm pretty sure I've got IBS. But I'll have to do some research into that and get back to people, because I'm sure.
I think it's that you might
maybe
not,
wanted to hear.
It might have been either ridiculously easy for you to have a wee or to shit. Because normally if you try and make both those muscles work, I think it's like that's why it's a one or the other. But if you're really needing to go in one sense or the other, I'm not gonna lie, Ben. I don't know if this is gonna make it into the podcast.
I think I have ultimate power, motherfucker, and I think that I went for a pee. So if I went for so does that mean that my ass is the one that, like, maybe I just really needed to poo and I just didn't know it? Because by your logic, if I went for a pee and then my ass was so loose that a poo fell out, then it's my ass's problem rather than my willy's problem not to being able to suppress the wee.
I think it's a bit of a stretch to call my musings on this logic. I am, pun intended, talking out of my ass with this one. So it's, thankfully just talking and not also taking a shit.
Talking about arseholes, you were saying about David Cameron and Rupert Murdoch?
Yeah, so what I observe in that is, they're all on the same team. I think that's where we left off. And so
as are my cock and my asshole. Potentially. They're both working in such tandem that they can work together. It's not a fault. It's a triumph.
You're the next fucking stage of human evolution here, Ben. Jesus Christ. So I observed this, this coming together of the political elite and the media moguls, and started to understand a bit more about how, say, the Conservatives stopped the second Leveson inquiry from happening, or Leveson Part 2 rather, and they, the Murdochs and those sorts of people at the top of the media food chain, will donate to the Conservative Party, or they will, or rather the people around them will. And the tabloid papers in particular, as we know, are very systematically hostile to the left, particularly when the left is further to the left and could actually threaten them in their position of influence. And likewise is very generous to the right. Unfortunately, this is then sort of influencing the televised media. So a good example of that, because people often this is where I lose people in this train of thought, and they think, but the TV media is supposed to be impartial and they're funded by the government and everything. I mean, that's already a clue that they might have some bias if they're being funded by the government,
Funded by the government.
But as a more concrete point, take a look at the paper review on BBC News, for example. Well, they're going to pick what they see as a representative sample of broadsheets and tabloids from across the political spectrum. But if the median or mean average paper is centre-right, well, then so will their coverage. Their coverage will also be. Likewise, their Dateline London programme, for example. Well, the people on that show are almost always going to be people who have come from quite a well-off background and have been in positions of privilege to take up, say, unpaid internships in big cities and to become journalists, or, work for the civil service, or to become part of political institutions in some form or of another in virtue of their privilege, at least in part. So, who are these people who are jet-setting to and from different corners of the globe to meet in London? Who are they to offer discourse on the experiences of millions of people being pushed into poverty in Britain, for example, or amongst the Western world, And
it has such a huge effect. The media, I mean, as we've sort of talked about, like in terms of even just what games you play as a kid, the media has such a huge fucking effect at every stage. And it's almost the most you could argue, the most important institution. Journalism as well, that's so important so there aren't abuses of power, and people, you're fighting for the people in the most truest sense of getting them the most clear information and explaining to them in the clearest, most understandable way what is going on. It is so important. And I know mistakes happen, but even the smallest mistakes can really have huge implications. And we should really, I mean, the Beeb is, I don't know, I just see so many instances where I'm like, how could you get that wrong? How could you, when you know the prime responsibility of your broadcasting services to be impartial and fair, and then I see articles written and I'm just like, you use that word? Are you sure? I don't know. It's so difficult though, because again, I'm coming from my certain standpoint, and what I see.
Well, this is the difficulty, isn't it? Because
this
is the difficulty, isn't it? Because we're we're both generally on the left, and so it's very easy for us to say, oh, the media's biased against the left and in favour of the right, and then the right wingers will say, oh no, that's not true. That the media's really liberal. It's it's really leftist, loony left media and all this, and then the TV media are going to be like, well, but both sides of the spectrum are complaining, so that probably means we've got it right. No, it doesn't. It means one side might be bullshitting a bit more than the other. There are ways to empirically verify this. That's what university studies have shown, for example.
True.
I have a really good example, just something that I found on my phone, if you don't mind me saying.
Or both are right as well, because there could be both people on both sides that make accurate assessments of things.
No, definitely. You're right to correct me on that, actually. That's very fair.
And not to say that there haven't been and again, all these issues are on axes of economic, social, but it's not to say that there hasn't been instances where potentially the Beeb or have been edging to more towards the left side of things. Sorry, bring up your example.
So this was from Sky News a few days ago, or rather, must be a week or two ago now. This was when it was counter-protest to the Black Lives Matter protests. Now, unfortunately, because I had my exams through all of this period, so I was seeing all of this on social media and not really being able to voice my own feelings on this or engage with it too much. But a really good example of this came from Sky News, where when they... So they had an article like a week before what I'm about to tell you, where they referred to Black Lives Matter protests turning into riots and the protesters being rioters. And indeed, there were cases where there was a bit of rioting happening, and that happened in the US. And, fair enough, if you're going to say it on those terms, then that's fine, but be consistent about it. Because then, when there were violent counter-protests, the riots were called scuffles, and the rioters were called counter-protesters. And that says so much, and people think it doesn't. People think that we're being really anal about this and really pedantic about it, but we're not.
We're not, because there are systems of people which it is their sole job to make sure to review every word that they put out, and for them to miss something like that, it's like there are loads of people that there is whole chains of networks which are. The whole thing, the whole duty of the media in its end product is to produce some words which tell you the story. Yeah. So naturally, those words are agonized over. Yeah. And then to miss something like that.
Yeah. This is the thing. So I think the best argument I can give for this, for kind of outrage at this, if you like, is that there are two things that are going. Well, there's one of two things that are going on here, right? Scenario A is that they made that choice of words and thought it was sort of, that it was kind of they didn't give it much thought and they thought it'd be fine, blah, 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 in which case it's an implicit bias and it might not be systematic, but in which case, well, you've just proven all the progressive-minded people right anyway, because it speaks to the fact that there is some form of implicit bias, whether it's against a certain race or one gender over another, or particularly like classist stuff going on, not assigning the same level of kind of credibility to poorer people or, something like that. And likewise, like if it was scenario B, where actually they did think about this for quite a while and thought it was fine anyway, well, that's a bit more sinister, that's coming from the top,
conspiracy
and that's,
side.
that's known,
yeah.
and in which case that's sort of proving our earlier discussion right. So it's kind of it's got to be one of those two things, because these kind of examples are not one-offs; they are consistent. Whether it's painting Jeremy Corbyn in shadier tones with his commie hat on, which he never actually wears, and painting him in Soviet colours and making him look all diminished and gremlinish compared to Theresa May or some shit like that, or whether it's the media outrage at his failure to bow low enough to, at the cenotaph or something like that, and then not picking up, not criticising Boris Johnson for hiding in a fridge during the election campaign, or, the letterboxes thing, or, like all the stuff about suspending Parliament illegally and all of this stuff. It's like, it's an absolute shit show. And yes, these things were talked about, but they weren't in the same terms. It was kind of, Boris is this, eccentric, laughable buffoon, so he gets let off the hook. And,
he hid in a fridge.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's so Boris. Oh, you couldn't make this stuff up. Ha, 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 ha. But, it's quite frightening because the left are held to much higher standards. That's the thing. It's like any whiff of hypocrisy, any mistake is pounced on. Anything that isn't a mistake but could be ambiguously interpreted as one will be pounced upon. And it's, it just simply isn't true of the right. And then, so when you take those tiny examples in language, in interpretation, in misquoting, in all sorts of things, it builds a much wider picture that does influence very significantly.
Yes,
and
really
that's
does.
not to say that there aren't journalists and sections of the media doing their job well. There still are. I like to hope there still are. I like to believe there still are. But, and yes, we are generalising. Yes, it's a more nuanced picture. But I think by and large, there's a lot of credibility to what we're saying there.
We've got to wrap up soon because I've got quesadillas to the right of me. But do you think it's going to get better? Do you think that in this sort of democratization that the internet brings of certain medias, do you think that we will get more unbiased news sources, or do you think it will go the opposite direction and people will just be in their bubbles even more?
It's
but fairly quickly.
Oh shit! Okay.
Because these quesadillas are smelling good.
Well, this is the thing. So the last time I came on Deep Chats in its Facebook live stream form, I made a prediction that was quite a way off, and did qualify my prediction by saying it could be a lot higher, it could be a lot lower. And I learned a very valuable lesson in that, which is that things are changing with such volatility at the moment. There is so much happening so fast, it is impossible to keep track of. And it makes it so much harder to predict what's going to happen. I like to think that there could be a resurgence of the left across Europe and maybe even America eventually. I look to people like Jacinda Ardern, for example, and think, what a bastion of hope for the left. She has handled COVID spectacularly, and today said that if you're an economy that's growing but your net social welfare is decreasing, that is a failure, not a success. To put it in those terms is fantastic. It's a manifesto for a generation. But every left-wing politician in any future election campaign is going to suffer from a deep fake video where someone has made it look like they've said something horrific and it won't be verified. And then eventually it will be confirmed that it was fake, but it's too late because 10% of the population still believe that it was either true in the first place or is a cover-up in denying that it was fake, or true or whatever. So
factcheck.org.
Fucking yes, exactly. And it started out as election fraud over the last, so in 2015 and 16 and 17, in various different guises, particularly in 2016 in terms of social media, but in terms of posing as a fake Welsh call centre that was surveying people in 2017, or illegal overspending in 2015. And, I am quite scared. There are countries in Europe that are going the way of neo-fascists. Take Viktor Orban in Hungary. Poland is now looking to go that way. We need the left and the centre to come together and say, there are some quite dangerous things happening. We need people like Jacinda Ardern and then centrists along the lines of Angela Merkel, or say in my girlfriend's country of Latvia, they have a kind of centre-right coalition, although in Britain it's more like centre-left. And their prime minister has dealt with COVID spectacularly and was responsible and brilliant and whatever. I'll wrap it up now because I can tell I can tell you're eyeing up. But yeah, I think it really calls for some brilliant leadership that is both rational and makes an emotional case with policies from the left and sensibility from the centre, I think.
And what a pleasure it is to have that man right here on the podcast, because give it a couple of years, mate. This will be used out of context. That slag room comment out of context.
It'll be put into an auto-tune remix
campaign
where I call someone a slag. That's what it'll be. If like a right-wing version of Cassette Boy or something making a remix of me.
Exactly, mate. That's what it'll be. But no, what a pleasure to have a future Prime Minister on the show.
You're way too fucking kind. I'm blushing all over, mate, honestly. Wait, that sounded... that came out incredibly wrong. You can tell it's been a long time chatting. I'm... now I really am blushing all over. Jesus Christ. I'm trying to keep a consistent question, a consistent string through these podcasts that I ask every time. And I don't know whether you got a chance to listen to the last one. I was on with my mate Nick, and we were trying to think about what that question could be to ask at the end of the podcast. But what we sort of fell on was if there is anything to be taken away from this podcast, what would it be? And it can then be a bit of a dialogue between the two. So if anyone were to take one thing, even if it was small, from what we've talked about, what do you think it would be to sort of put a bow on this piece of audio? Oh, I mean, it's a fantastic question. I really struggle with questions like this. I think certainly in the latter half of it, I guess think critically and engage with the external world around you in a way that is balanced and, thoughtful, I guess.
But also remember that you're a fucking idiot sometimes.
Yes.
And we all make fucking stupid decisions.
Make sure to hide lots of dirty, inappropriate jokes in 3+ video games for kids to later discover when they grow up.
Thank you so much, Joel, for joining me. Honestly, mate, it's been lovely. It's been a pleasure, and I always enjoy speaking to you. It's beautiful. Thanks, mate.
Thank you so much, Ben. It was an absolute pleasure. I'm so glad you got me on board for this.
And cut. God, what a soppy shit.